The Polybrute 12 is an insanely awesome sounding analog synthesizer that can go above and beyond in the hands of a keyboard player. It can literally blow up your subwoofer. It did to mine, and it wasn't even that loud. But whether or not you play the keys, it doesn't stop it from being an incredible one-stop shop analog polysynth in the studio of the average producer. It's very expensive, but if you get your hands on one, you'll know why. It has a full metal build, analog VCOs, leather and wood sides, really good feeling pots and faders, a brand new full touch keyboard technology, tons of playable modulation, it's bitimbral, it's 12 voices, it's basically everything you would ever want from an analog synthesizer. But do you need all that stuff to have a good time? Of course not, but if you really need the morphing, playable modulation, aka put yourself as a human into your music control, it's really hard to find a better synth than this. Today, I'm gonna show you my favorite things about the Polybrute 12, some things I don't like, and in the process, show you how it sounds. Arturia did, however, send this unit for me to check out, and I probably should have checked to see if I could keep it because, yep, I want it. All right, let's get deep. The pros. This is such an unassuming little control all the way over here, but it's really what sets the whole Polybrute apart from any synthesizer except maybe the Yamaha DN200 or AN200. If you know, you know. This morph knob morphs all the parameters on the synthesizer from one setting to another. It's not playing two patches at once, which you can do, by the way, but instead it's gliding between a ton of different settings on the synthesizer. Here. Listen to this. We're here on this initialized patch, and if I go from morph sound A all the way to sound B, the only thing that's changed is that we're now listening to a pulse width. But now that we're over on sound B, I can say, let's lower the filter, maybe a little bit of resonance, turn up VCO2, a little bit of envelope amount, right? And then I'll also, just for dramatic effect, send LFO1 to the pitch of everything. And maybe a little faster. Now if I go back to A, you can hear VCO2 went away, VCO1 turned back into the sawtooth, our filters opened up, and the depth amount of LFO going to the oscillator pitch is all gone. You're not playing two patches at once. You're just morphing between a ton of different settings on the synth from one setting to another. And you could even leave it somewhere in the middle. And you might notice this graphic here moving, and you might say, hey, that looks like this little Morpheé, morph pad, whatever, Morpheé pad here. And that's basically because it is the same thing. What's cool with this is you have two different axes at which you can then move to the other patch. So one axis will take the filter and pitch information, and then the other axis is wave shapes. Or if you go across both, it'll do it all at once. And if morph is in the middle or a little bit here, it'll start affecting either side of the patch a little bit or more than the other. Unless you have it right in the center, then it'll do both evenly. So it's a really weird, kind of fun way to play between different patches. So maybe here, we'll turn up VCO2 and then tune it up.
Yo, real quick, I completely forgot to mention one of the craziest things about the Morph Knob, and that is that you can copy any preset to Morph B on whatever preset you're working on. So then you can morph between what you're working on into a preset that you've made or a preset that the synth comes with, and find all these new types of presets within those two presets, if that even makes any sense. Anyway, I thought it would be worth mentioning the Morph Knob's nuts. I can do a whole video on just it alone, but with that out of the way, let's get back to it.
Now, I know we jumped straight into the deep end on that one, but my next point is that the Polybrute is super easy to program. I swear. The knob per function on this thing is great, and there are a lot of finer details in the options menu, which are pretty easy to navigate. They remind me a bit of my older MPCs because it's a number system. So, for example, if I wanted to change like the analog drift, it's settings 1, 4, 8. And I know I went a little fast, but if you really look at it, I want to change my synth voice, I want to change the voicing, so I press 4, and then I want to go to analog accuracy. And now that I'm here, I want the pitch to be wild, right? So now it's gonna give it that kind of warbliness, but it's just cool that you can kind of build this muscle memory using this number system to get to where you need to go. Next up is the sound, because it's analog, right? So it really hits the mark for that big warmth that you would expect from a synth like this. But it does have fun ways of getting you out of that typical like boring analog sound using this here, the metalizer. And of course you have some other things here like FM and sync, but the metalizer I think stays a bit more musical. And all the metalizer is a wave folder. So if you're over on your triangle, it's just gonna keep folding that. But in the menu here, you can actually change the metalizer mode to be all waves. So this means you're not stuck to just doing wave folding on the triangle. You can do it to the sawtooth or the pulse width. On top of the metalizer, you also have other things, of course, like the Morph Knob, which we just talked about, the dual analog filters, LFO3 kind of having control over its curve and symmetry, which is fun to kind of, you know, get a new style of LFO, especially when you start using the retrig, single, and cycle stuff. You can start to use it as another envelope, and I mean, the list goes on. But to take advantage of all of this modulation capabilities, it brings us to our next point, which is this mod matrix. I freaking love this thing. It's super easy to assign whatever you want. So these numbers here, I just press and hold 4, which correspond to these little patches here. As I hold that, I just move whatever I want, and bam, it's now set. So now I can change LFO3, I can route that to LFO2's rate, turn this up, and bam, there you go. Or if I want my velocity to be my filter cutoff for both of these two filters, then I'll say velocity to 5 and then turn it up. Easy peasy, super simple. And you have 4 pages of 8 destinations each, giving you a total of 32 destinations. And you're stuck with these 12 sources on the side, but that's enough for me. And one thing that took me a sec to understand, but was super helpful once I got it, once it clicked, was how to assign things to the Morpheé pad. It's very straightforward. So if you have the Morpheé pad set to matrix, when I slide my hand around this, you'll see that there's X, Y, and Z. You have X, Y, and Z here, but it's also tied into the wheel, the ribbon, and the expression to input. You can basically just ignore those if you don't want to use those. So for example, if I wanted, when I push my Morpheé pad down to make the pitch of everything go down, I'll just say Z, which is our axis down. Z, go to number 1, which is the pitch global for everything, turn it down, and bam. Congratulations. It now sounds awful. Now number 5, I think, may have lost count, is LFO3 is super fun to use. It has its own curve and symmetry settings, which can kind of be used as like a 4th envelope, especially once you start putting it in its one-shot mode. For example, here I'll send LFO3 to our filter cutoff. Boom, right there. By how much? Single shot mode. Right, then you have your speed. Now before we get to the bad, the final one is the effects section. These do a lot of the heavy lifting when wanting to make something sound good, fast. They're just enough to get you to where you need to go without being distracting. Are they incredible? No, but are they usable? Hell yeah. For example, check this out. Again, initialize patch, turn up your reverb, go to Alt, then we'll select, for example, Dreamy. Turn your filter down, a little bit of resonance, envelope amount. A little less of this, a little more of this, modulation. Not bad. Not bad. Now, it ain't all perfect, right? It never is, and that's fine. 'Tis life. But when looking at the Polybrute, here's what I gotta say. The filter section can be a little confusing with the serial and parallel modes, plus the option for routing them within the oscillator mixer section. Now, zooming out, this is great to have this much flexibility, but at times you forget that an oscillator might be going to one filter and not the other, and it's also in parallel mode, but the volume's off for that filter, or it's muted on the oscillator mixer side, right? So it's a lot to kind of keep an eye on. Now, when looking at a synth like this, there is so much to learn that if you're super into sound design, it's going to take a sec to get up and running. But again, if you're super into sound design, you'd love stuff like this, right? The nitty gritty and the nuance of it all. But to a first timer, I would not suggest something like this because it's gobs of money that you can get tons of other stuff for. And it's going to be like drinking from the fire hose for a while. It might be a little intimidating at first. So maybe an option is to save your money and start on something smaller, simpler, and used. Now, lastly, kind of what I've been alluding to is that I wish it had a 4th mod envelope, especially at this price. Like I mentioned earlier, LFO3 can be faked into being an envelope, sort of, but there are a few synths out there that have the same amount of modulation sources, if not more, and cost half the price. And yeah, you know what? Well, we're here, might as well talk about it. I didn't talk about the crazy keyboard technology that this has, the whole full touch keyboard, right? But that's because I don't find that too useful in a lot of the music that I'm making. I think a lot of what the Polybrute 12 has to offer will really shine in the hands of a keyboard player, because you got stuff like the Morpheé pad, you got the ribbon controller, you got the full touch, you got the morphing, you got the layering, you got splits. So much of this really leads into like the keyboard player's world. And I know a few chords, but I'm not that fancy yet. Anyway, I appreciate you, my friend. If you want to support the channel, I do sell some MIDI hats, MIDI shirts at this site here, but you kicking it is more than enough. Until next week, hope to see you again. You already know the drill. Share the love, share the knowledge. Knowledge is power. Peace.